Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy Amarati, and I am Assistant Director of our ACU Online Writing Center. I'm thrilled to be working again today with Dr. Tanya Hart, who is one of our professional writing tutors. Hi, Tanya.
Hello, everybody.
So today's webinar is part 2 in a series of 2 webinars on the topic of writing a rhetorical analysis. We'll be posting the links to this recording and the slide deck for the webinar to our Online Writing Center website, and the links to the resources in the slide deck will be active. For the second webinar on rhetorical analysis, these are our learning objectives. By the end of the session, we will understand interpretation and evaluation in rhetorical analysis and workshop APCO 311 Week 3 Assignment 1, Rhetorical Interpretation and Evaluation, the big so what of rhetorical criticism. To start, Tanya's going to take us through learning objective 1, understand interpretation and evaluation in rhetorical analysis.
Thanks, Emmy. Hey, everybody. So let's just jump off into week 2 of rhetorical analysis. Some things are going to be a review, some things we're going to be building on to just get you guys really out there doing rhetorical analysis as rhetors. Okay, so what is rhetoric? Stoner talks about rhetoric as, quote, messages that rely on verbal and nonverbal symbols that more or less intentionally influence social attitudes, beliefs, values, and actions. And that rhetorical acts, artifacts, texts, and discourse exist within context. And within context, he's talking about specific moments in time. I used to talk to students about, taking a photograph. If you could, on your phone or with a camera, take a photograph in time, you've got a snapshot of what's going on, a context, a place, an event. You see people there, you see an audience, you could even capture social attitudes. This is what rhetorical acts do. They just capture these things. So we can systematically examine messages in order to determine the parts of messages and how they work together, revealing their function and meaning. Now, one thing that's really important about this week is that this is something that everybody does. Okay, as humans, we have this capability. We have reasons for using social symbols and artifacts and texts when we talk about things that we believe in, and we're trying to get other people to understand where we're coming from and agree with our thoughts and perceptions. So this isn't like, pie in the sky. I mean, we're talking about this in a university setting, but this is something that everyone does every day. It's just learning what rhetoric is, how to use it, and how to articulate all of these prompts, these social and verbal and nonverbal symbols, as we go through our use of rhetorical devices. Now, Dr. Belinda Stillion Southard is a rhetoric professor, and she's going to be the TED Talk, the basis of your excitement for this week. And she hits the nail on the head, in my opinion, in terms of understanding rhetoric and just demystifying it. She basically says that a lot of people think that rhetoric is just pure BS. It's like, let's just get down to it. It's BS. And that is just, it's missing the point. I would think it's actually kind of infantile. Rhetoric isn't bad, it isn't good, it isn't negative, it isn't positive, it just is. It's neutral. Okay, rhetoric is what people rely on and use when manipulating social symbols and artifacts and text. And we do this as humans in speech, we do it in music, we do it in artwork, we do it as a means to persuade people, to articulate to audiences, and to try to persuade them over from their point of view to our thinking. Okay, so that's not positive, it's not neutral, it's not negative, it's just neutral. Understanding rhetoric means developing and growing in this ability not only to communicate rhetorically, but to learn how to listen and to think and to speak using rhetorical steps and tools. So this is what we're going to be building on today. So, 4 steps, according to Stoner: describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. Last week in the first assignment, we dealt a lot with describing and analyzing, because those are 2 things that you have to learn how to do to be able to see. Okay, and these 4 steps are very, very critical. Don't get them out of order, don't get them twisted, especially don't go to evaluate first. Learn how to use all of these 4 steps in order: describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. So, describe. In the first assignment, we looked at rhetorical analysis, and we focused on people describing a situation, a thought, an event, or a feeling. So that is what description is. What are the parts? What are the contexts, the interaction of a text? How is it working with the context? Analyzing description means stepping basically into the mind or the space of an author or a speaker, seeing things from their perspective. That's what they're trying to get you to be able to do. So as you're listening or as you're reading, think, is the description flat? Is it shapeless? Or is it formed or cohesive? Is this something that the rhetor, the person, the author, has actually thought about? Are the parts fitting together coherently? Or are you seeing or hearing perhaps discrepancies or imbalances where things really aren't fitting together? What's the context of the description? Rhetoric embraces descriptions across time. That's what you're seeing with this week with Dr. Stillian Southard. This is where rhetors may describe moments in time by actually delving into the past, delving into something that may at first seem totally disconnected from that initial description. But they do this in order to explain change over time, to shape our understanding of what's going on in the present, what they're talking about, but also to maybe see things differently in the future. So, in terms of description, do the context stand the scrutiny of the texts? Do they fit together? You're learning how to rhetorically analyze descriptions, and this will sharpen how you see, how you describe, and how you explain the world to another human being. Let's read further in terms of analysis. Wielding description and analysis within rhetorical analysis requires taking the time, taking a deep breath to see the ways in which people are describing in order to persuade you. Because remember, description is all about explaining things in focused, structured, learned ways as a person tries to get their point across to someone else. Okay. So this use of rhetoric, again, isn't positive, it's not negative, but it's how we communicate, trying to persuade other people. So in terms of analysis, then, you're looking at the description and you're looking at the use of rhetorical tools, and these tools are neutral, and this is a learned thing that you're doing. So critiquing descriptions through rhetorical analysis is that next logical step. Learning how to analyze descriptions requires that the speaker or the writer has also analyzed her or his position to the point of accurately describing a situation, themselves doing an analysis, and then just putting it out there for people to hear, to see, and critique. They can agree, they can disagree. So as you're stepping into analysis, you're looking at what someone else has already thought about, and then you're analyzing what they have done. As listeners, as viewers, again, humans critique descriptions through an analysis. We analyze the parts of speech, the parts of something visual, the parts of music, artwork, whatever it is. We analyze those parts and we look at the text, the broader context, and also subtexts that are going on to judge whether what is being described on analysis holds together. Does this stick together? Then, after description and analysis, the logical final steps are interpretation and evaluation. So let's read. To interpret, according to Stoner, is, quote, the process of explaining what it means that a rhetor selected and used certain persuasive devices in a message or a campaign. So basically, we're looking at the rhetor, the person who is propounding the rhetoric, and saying, what devices, what persuasive messages, what things did they stick into this message or campaign? Okay. We're going to be drawing conclusions about whether the rhetor made certain choices and how those choices worked. Did they impact the target? Did the choices work? They could have made other choices of rhetoric. They could have made other choices to use within this message. But we are looking at the interpretation, the process of explaining what they chose and why they chose it and did it work. Okay? Now, Dr. Stillion, she took what somebody might think as a common everyday occurrence. Okay. She talks about in her TED talk that she just had a baby. Okay. Women have babies every day. Sorry, but it's true. It happens. Okay. And she wanted to go back to work. Women around the world have babies every day and they sometimes quickly go back to work because they need to or because they want to. So this isn't some like pie in the sky, from Mars example that she's talking about. She's talking about something that occurred in her everyday life. But she's using this common everyday occurrence to show how this can become a rhetorical so what in society. How, with the use of the right symbols, the right artifacts, and the right texts, she can take something that women around the world for millennia have been doing on a daily basis and construct it in a way that brings really, really deeper meaning. Okay. And she challenged me, okay, for a good example of rhetoric in everyday life. Okay. And this is the second part of your challenge in this week. Use this in everyday life. Okay. I'm a bit of a sports nut. I love sports. Okay. And I thought about, how can you bring a rhetor or an author together in terms of sports and an everyday occurrence that could make sense? And I thought, okay, football coach. Okay, football coach. Love football. Football coach, NFL, talking about plotting moves down the field, one play at a time. So this is rhetoric, okay? If the description, the first step in Stoner, description, to describe something, if the description is the coach's explanation of what their team did on a possession, okay? Second step, analyze. If the coach's analysis means looking at each play as an explanation of a total interpretation, okay, and then if you go one step further, to interpret means that the coach is breaking the plays down into constituent bits of players, calls, and contexts, then it means that coach, whatever, as a human being, is employing rhetoric and rhetorical analysis in order to try to move his team or her team down the field with the end goal of winning a game. So, interpretation. Why did the coach make these calls? What were other choices that she or he could have made at those particular times? How did the choices work with the audience? If you think about watching a game on TV, you're going to see, is the audience booing? Is the audience cheering? If you're watching online, maybe your social media, you're seeing people's responses, what they're saying. What are the fan responses within the stands? Are they the same as the ones on social media? Are they the same as the observations that you're getting with your friends that you're watching this at home? Okay. What happens in the next quarter? If you start running through interpretation of the calls as the coach goes through and the players and the context, what happens? Does the interpretation change? What happens at the end of the game? Because you're walking through what the coach, she or he, is mentally walking through, putting out there, and then you are evaluating and interpreting what's going on. So, to do interpretation, first, you got to ask some questions. Okay. Why did the rhetor make certain choices? In other words, it's, third down and 10. Why did the coach decide to, run the ball, and not pass? Okay. What impact would these choices have on different audiences? Okay. How do the choices compare to other possible choices? So, okay, let's back off from the coach. Okay, let's go to a writer. Okay, a writer trying to explain something. They can have a bazillion places that they can make choices to bring out, to bolster, to strengthen, to persuade you. So, what do the choices that they've made, how do those compare in your mind to other choices you're thinking about? What do the choices reveal about the rhetor? What's in the background maybe that you can't see, that he or she may not want you to see, but what do the choices reveal? And what do the choices reveal about the audience and society? Because when we're trying to persuade someone that what we're saying, what we're thinking has value, listen to us, we are speaking to an audience. We don't always control the audience, but we are speaking to an audience. And we are using symbols, we're using artifacts, we're using things that they will recognize. So, okay, what is this saying about my cognizance of the audience? What is it saying that when I say something and it's like, oh my goodness, she didn't know who she was talking to. She just upset and confused or really disturbed a lot of people. What does the choices say about the audience? And then compare the patterns from your analysis to something else. Okay. You guys are being bred in this, you're being taught this. So, communication theory, requirements of the context, similar messages. Now let's go back to that football coach or any coach as a rhetor. Okay. Why the choices? Again, what would be the impact of each choice and cumulative choices and decisions on the audience if other decisions had been made, if other tools had been used? If the person who is the coach had just thought about the stadium audience and not the online audience, or vice versa. Okay. On the overall end game, persuading fans and critics alike, okay, because the coaches are dealing with the fans and critics, that as the coach, that coach's description, that coach's analyses, that coach's interpretation of each stage of the game their use of the talents of their players, their position, their coaches, all that stuff was correct. Okay. This is what we're doing when we're interpreting. Now, the final stage, evaluation. Stoner says the evaluation is the use of stated criteria to determine the merit, the worth, significance, and effectiveness of the rhetorical strategies in the message. Okay. Did it work? Did everything fit together? This is a value judgment that we make as rhetors who are not just critiquing, but we're critiquing, but also when we speak, when we write, we now are putting messages out there. Okay. How is it working? How are things sticking together? These are value judgments. In making these judgments, determine, is the message accurate and truthful? Does the message use reasonable, effective argumentation? Does it apply rhetorical devices ethically? And does it uphold desirable values? Evaluation. Initially, and I talked about this briefly last week, and I mentioned it initially at the top of my talk, of doing the steps in Stoner in order. And I said, don't jump to valuation first. Unfortunately, I think that as humans, sometimes we're tempted to do that. We're tempted to hear something and just go to like, okay, does that step on my toes? Does that support something that I already believe? Does that sound plausible? Does that sound something that, I might be interested in? And we go to yes or no real quick without doing the first 3 steps. Okay. In order to do the first 3 steps and get to a sound evaluation, is the message accurate and truthful? That means really setting the self aside and trying to look at things from a realistic perspective that says, okay, this might not feel good. Okay, this might really challenge where I'm coming from, what I think. Okay, this right now might get into a social area that makes me feel kind of uncomfortable, because these are social texts and artifacts that are being used to persuade. So put the self over to the side. Is the message accurate and truthful? Does it use reasonable, effective argumentation? I am just like a bulldog on argumentation. I'm a historian. Historians are I mean, law schools, recruit from history programs. We are just like, you've got to have that argumentation down. And that means looking at the against as well as the pro. Look at both sides. Is this person applying rhetorical devices ethically? Is this fair? Is this right? Use some judgment. And is this message upholding desirable values? Okay. So you've got to get back into society where we are as human beings and kind of set ourselves aside and look at the message, on its own. Now, for a minute, let's go back to football coach. My last name is Hart. Let's say Coach Hart. Yeah, okay. Let's go back to Coach Hart. Was her overall message correct? Was it persuasive? And we're not talking about the end of the game and who won, okay? Because that's one thing to get to the end of the game, who won the game, what's my evaluation? Coach Hart must have known what she was talking about. You may not have felt that way at halftime, all right? Or at the end of the first quarter, okay? So, persuasion. We're talking about standing up to the scrutiny of step-by-step rhetorical analysis persuasion, being that type of persuasive. In the moment, each play on the possessions in the quarters at the end of the game, was Coach Hart's message persuasive? Was her message ethical? Was it desirable? Was it reasonable? Was it accurate? Was it truthful? That's what it means to do a fair, balanced, rhetorically accurate evaluation. So, looking at the football coach as a rhetor, as a trained professional who understands looking at and describing something, analyzing a defense or offense to choose the next plays, interpreting responses, texts, and contexts, evaluating situations at hand to produce and desired end results, which is the victories. Okay, everybody wants to win. Is this person using the tools of rhetorical analysis and bringing them into day-to-day life? That's what we're being called to do these past 2 weeks in these assignments. That's what your professor is calling you to do. So as you learn and polish these rhetorical analysis tools, remember these can easily move outside of the university into daily life.
I love Tanya's football coach analogy because it is a way of viewing it in the context of daily life. And that's something that's going to be really important in our assignment this week. So for learning objective 2, we're going to move on to workshop APCO 311, week 3, assignment 1. Tanya masterfully reviewed the basics of describing and analyzing rhetoric and then went over our new steps on interpreting and evaluating. So now let's consider how we're going to apply these steps from Stoner in APCO 311, the course on rhetorical analysis. The specific focus is week 3, assignment 1, and for the next few slides, we're going to read through that assignment.
Thanks so much, Emmy. I really appreciate it. Let's look at the preamble because the preamble is the why of the assignment. It's just very, very basic. The purpose of this assignment is to explore the purpose and importance of rhetorical criticism. Okay. You started last week, okay, with the 4 rhetors being interviewed about the 2020 inaugural address that President Joseph Biden gave. Okay, not the address itself, but what they were saying as rhetors about the inaugural address. Now you're going one step further, okay, in doing rhetorical criticism. Okay, you're looking at rhetorical messages from a pro. This is a professor of rhetoric. So, what's the big deal? What is the big deal with rhetorical criticism? If you've got a vast majority of people who you ask, about rhetoric, and they're either kind of like, huh, or, it's negative or it's BS, then what's the big deal? Why bother? Okay, is rhetorical analysis, rhetorical criticism even useful outside of papers that you're writing for university classes? What can humans actually do with rhetorical criticism, besides being football coaches in my mind? Okay, so you've got assignment instructions. You've got a 2 to 3 page paper. And I'm just going to put myself out there. When I was in undergrad, this was like, death on a Ritz for me. I hated writing 3 page papers because there is no room for BS. You have to be really succinct and focused. Okay. So you have to address within 2 to 3 pages the following topics. Number 1, Dr. Stillian Southard's TED Talk. Okay, change the language, change the beliefs. I've watched this several times. The first time that when she went through and she started talking about the Grimke sisters, I kind of flinched. I'm a historian of U.S. women's history, and I was like, "Oh Lord, is she gonna get this right?" Girlfriend was spot on with the Grimke's. She got her history spot on. Angelina Grimke was Sarah too, Sarah first, but then Angelina, they were powerhouses in the anti-slavery movement. So watch her TED Talk. Listen, pay attention to it. She is a rhetor. How is she framing what she says? The description, okay, the analysis, the evaluation, the everything, the interpretation, the evaluation. How is she explaining this common everyday occurrence? Then, number two, according to Dr. Stillian Southard, what's the significance of rhetorical interpretation and evaluation? What is the big deal? What can humans do with significant, powerfully placed, powerfully messaged rhetorical interpretation and evaluation? Third, you're going to kind of do like what I did. Find an example from everyday life. Don't roll up with, you know, with football coaches. Come up with something else. But find something from everyday life to further illustrate the significance of rhetorical interpretation and evaluation. Okay. You've had already a discussion question. Okay, so it can be that, it can be something different. You're charged to use at least 3 outside sources, and one may include your textbook. Okay.
Okay, now that Tanya's read through the assignment description, we're going to take a couple of minutes to look at the rubric and see how the criteria relate to the questions from the assignment. The first 25 points of the assignment will come from summarizing Dr. Stillian Southard's arguments from the YouTube video. The next 25 points will come from finding that example of rhetoric from everyday life, perhaps the editorial that you've already used for your discussion, and telling why the interpretation and evaluation of it is important. For the third criterion, you'll get up to 20 points for using at least 3 scholarly sources. Remember, that can include your textbook as one, to support your interpretation and evaluation of the rhetorical artifact. Finally, the rubric allots 15 points for writing clearly with minimal errors and 15 more points for applying the formatting requirements. That means you need to write a 2 to 3 page paper formatted according to APA guidelines, including your in-text citations and a references page. We'll address some specifics about citing and referencing later, but right now Tanya is going to provide some hints for organizing and developing the draft.
Thanks, Emmy. Organization. Okay. If you ever feel unmoored from a topic, always go back to the questions. Always go back. Am I answering the questions? So first, and most significant, is what Dr. Stillian Southard says about rhetorical interpretation and evaluation. What's the significance? In terms of writing, you're going to have to construct a thesis statement. I would encourage you to, once you come up with what you think is her brand of the significance of a rhetorical interpretation and evaluation, to include that within your thesis statement. Build your thesis statement around that. Second, everyday life. This can be something you've already talked about in your discussion question. It can be something different. But when you talk about your everyday rhetorical example, this is your choice. You now are the rhetor. Okay, so think carefully. You got to work through all 4 steps of rhetorical analysis. Okay, so you're going to have to describe the everyday example. You're going to have to analyze the everyday example that you're talking about. And then you're going to have to interpret and evaluate the everyday example and explain why interpretation and evaluation is important. And again, go back to Dr. Stillian Southard. She is talking about why she thinks rhetorical interpretation and evaluation is important. So I would encourage you to look at her, yes, her perspective and tie your perspective in with hers. And remember, you only got 2 or 3 pages. So keep your writing crisp, keep it directed, keep it to the point. What is she talking about? What is her perspective on the significance of rhetorical interpretation and evaluation in your thesis statement? And then go through and thoroughly, rhetorically evaluate whatever you choose as an everyday example. Because she does a thorough rhetorical evaluation on the everyday example that she has chosen. She is not half stepping. So outline each section with guiding questions and or examples. As Dr. Stillian Southard is walking us through her mind and her thinking, walk your reader through your mind and your thinking with guiding questions and examples. And then finally, I don't know how much more succinctly I can, drill this in, but you're not only a critiquer. Okay, last week you're a critiquer. This week, now you're sitting at the table as a rhetor. Your message that you are writing in these 2 to 3 pages needs to persuade your audience. So make sure that your questions and your examples lead your audience in the right direction. And for setting up your draft, we have a link here to the ACU APA course paper template to help you. So you just click on that link and get to stepping. Emmy?
Thank you, Tanya. The APA course paper template is great because it has all of your APA settings like the margins and the font and whatnot already put in. So it's super helpful. And now we're going to talk some more about APA. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to cite and reference your sources. You're required to use a variety of resources for this paper, including Dr. Stillian Southard's TED Talk, perhaps an editorial from an online or regular newspaper, and your 3 scholarly sources, which can include journal articles and your textbook. So we're going to go over how to format references and in-text citations for all these source types. First, we're going to start with your textbook. For the module, you're assigned a few chapters from the textbook, which was written by one author, Stoner. So we're going to discuss how to write the reference for a whole authored book. A whole authored book means that one author wrote the entire book themselves, so the reference will refer to the whole book, not to the specific chapters. However, APA does provide an option to refer to specific chapters in your in-text citations, and we'll see how this works. First, to write the reference for the whole authored book, put the author's last name and first and middle initials. If they only have a first initial, just put the first initial. Here we have Stoner, M. Next, we put the year of publication in parentheses. The title of the book goes in italics and sentence case. Sentence case means that we capitalize only the first words of the title and subtitle. So here we have the M capitalized and the A capitalized. If there were proper nouns or adjectives in there, we would also capitalize those. But in this case, we don't have any of those. If we have addition information, we can put that in parentheses after the title. Here we have second and then an ED followed by a period for addition. And last, we need the publisher. Once we've written the reference, we know how to cite in text because APA applies a format that we call author date citation. Those are the first 2 elements of your reference, the author and then the date. So for a paraphrase, we can name the author and year in parentheses, separated by a comma, at the end of the sentence that contains the borrowed idea. That's what we've done in this first example. Each rhetorical artifact exists within its own context of a rhetor, audience, time, place, events, and social conditions and attitudes. The citation says Stoner, 2020. We can also name the author in our sentence and follow their name immediately with the year in parentheses, as shown in the second example. Stoner, parentheses 2020, describe context as. Remember here, if you directly quote the text, you also need to include locator information to help the reader find the direct quote in its original context. So for a book, this locator information is usually a page number. So after the quote, I could just have P period 49 for page 49 in parentheses. However, we mentioned the option that APA now offers if you want to refer to specific chapters to highlight to your professor, hey, look, I read this chapter and I used it. So if you'd like to do that after a direct quote, you can put the chapter number, spell out chapter, and then put it before the page information. So here we have chapter 4, comma, page 49. Next, we're going to look at how to cite a journal article. The assignment says you need to use at least 3 scholarly sources to support your analysis and evaluation of your everyday example of rhetoric. So if you use your textbook as one scholarly source, which we just went over, you can use peer-reviewed journal articles for the other 2. The article that I'm using as a model here is actually from your course resources for the module. It's by Brock Reed. So just as we did for the textbook reference, we put the author's last name followed by a comma and the first initial. Next, we again put the year of publication in parentheses. For a journal article, you only need the year, even if the journal provides other publication information for the date. After the year, we put the title of the article in sentence case. So remember, sentence case means we capitalize only the first word of the title and subtitle and any proper nouns or adjectives. Here we just have a title. We don't have a subtitle and we don't have any proper word forms, so we just capitalize the R at the beginning of rhetorical criticism as argument. Next, we need to provide information about the larger journal in which the article was published. So this time we put the title of the journal and we use what we call regular title case. Title case means that you're going to capitalize all the major words, including prepositions and conjunctions of more than 4 letters. Small words like of aren't capitalized, so that's why here we've capitalized the Q, the J, and the S, but not the O. The title goes in italics, followed by a comma, and then put the volume number. You'll see that the volume number is also slanty. It's in italics too. The issue number goes in parentheses next, but that does not go in italics. So we have 60 in italics, parentheses 2, then another comma, and then the page range. Last, we put the DOI number, or if there's no DOI, you can put a publicly accessible URL. Both a DOI and a URL should begin with https://. And once again, because we've written out the reference, we know how to cite in text with the author and the date. This time I mixed it up a little bit. For the paraphrase, I named the author in my sentence and I put the year in parentheses after their name. I don't need any other information for this citation because it's a paraphrase. Brock Reed, parentheses 1974, outlined 5 characteristics of argument. For the direct quote, I decided to put it all at the end in a parenthetical citation. I still need locator information to help the reader find the quote in its original context. So I put the author, the year, and the page in parentheses with all the elements separated by commas. Brock Reed, comma, 1974, comma, page 174. Next, let's talk about how to cite Dr. Stillian Southard's TED Talk. This TED Talk was published on YouTube, and APA shares specific guidelines for citing a YouTube video. So because we're citing the YouTube video, the channel that published the video is actually considered the author. We're not going to put Dr. Stillian Southard's name. We're going to put TEDx Talks because they're the account that published it. For the date, we're going to put the most specific date information available. So for a YouTube video, that's pretty much always the year, comma, month, and day. Spell out the name of the month. So here we have April spelled out. Next, we put the title of the video in italics. This time the title is written in sentence case, so I've capitalized the C at the beginning of the title, the B at the beginning of the subtitle, which is also in Dr. Stillian Southard's name, so it would be capitalized anyway. So Belinda Stillian Southard and TEDx UGA are capitalized because they're proper nouns. After the title, since it's a video, we need to put the word video, beginning with a capital V in square brackets. Next, we need to list YouTube as the site of publication. And last, we put the URL beginning with https://. Again, our citations are going to refer to the author and date as listed in the reference. So this means that even though Dr. Stillian Southard is the TEDx speaker, we need to parenthetically cite TEDx talk so the reader can match the citation to the reference at the end of the paper. At the end of both my example sentences, the paraphrase and the direct quote, I've put TEDx talks, 2013 in parentheses. To identify the speaker, you can put their last name. This this speaker has a double last name, so we put both her names in this case in the sentence text. Stillian Southard argued that language can be used to change an outdated belief system. TEDx Talks 2013. I've done the same thing in the direct quote. I've put her name in the text to show that she's the one who said it. I've got the account name and the year in parentheses at the end. And because I'm directly quoting, I've also added locator information. We don't have page numbers for a video, so we're going to put a timestamp. And we use the second in the video when the quotation begins. The last type of source we're going to model is a newspaper article, because for your discussion this week, you were asked to find an editorial in a paper like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal through our library archives. You're accessing it electronically that way. So we're going to talk about how to cite that editorial in your references and your text in case that's what you want to use as your real life example. So this is a format that would apply to articles from a newspaper or periodical, whether they are published in physical form or online. We use the same format according to APA guidelines. So I used an editorial from the New York Times. First, I put the author's last name and initial. I've got Schmiemann, S, period. For the date, we use specific information. We use the year, 2024, April 29th, year, month, and day in parentheses. Next, write the title of the article or the editorial in sentence case. So there's only a title here and there are no proper nouns or adjectives in it. So all I did was capitalize the S for student protest is an essential part of education. The title of the newspaper or the periodical goes in title case and italics. So I have the New York Times, all of my words are capitalized because there are no tiny words like of. And last, after that, we're going to put the URL if it's published electronically. Our in-text citations, again, will follow author date format. Schmiemann's name is followed immediately by 2024, whether we name Schmiemann in the sentence as a word or in parentheses at the end. So for the first example, I have Schmiemann 2024 invoked the impact of technology on the severity of student protesters' responses. That's a paraphrase. My next one, it's a little bit different than what we've seen before again, because we have a direct quote. We need to provide locator information, but because I found the article online through our ACU access, I don't have a page number. In this case, you can provide a paragraph number by counting down paragraphs from the top. So I counted down. This quote was in paragraph 5. So I used the abbreviation para, P-A-R-A period, followed by a 5 to show where the quote is in the article. And here is a handy chart to help if you are citing multiple authors. All our examples so far ended up having one author. So let's look at how to format references and citations with different number of authors. At the beginning of a reference, if you have more than one author, you're going to separate the last names and the initials of the multiple authors with commas and put an ampersand symbol before the last name of the last author. So here I've got Kirschner, LG, comma, ampersand symbol for and, Mandel, comma, SR. As you can see, even if you have just two authors, you put a comma and then the ampersand symbol before it. Here's our handy table next that shows how to format the in-text citations for different numbers of authors. For one author, as we have already seen, we use the author's last name and the year, Stoner, 2020, or Stoner 2020 stated. For two authors, you're going to use both authors' last names, but they're going to be presented differently based on whether you write their names in parentheses or make them part of your sentence. If you cite them parenthetically, as in the top box, you would put an ampersand between their names. So I have Miller and Cook with an ampersand, comma 2022. If I wrote Miller and Cook in my sentence, like Miller and Cook 2022 observed, I would write out the word and. Then for three or more authors, we're going to use the first author's last name followed by the phrase et al., which is Latin for and others. So I have Kemp et al., comma 2024 as my parenthetical citation, and as my narrative example, or where I had it written in my sentence, I would write Kemp et al. 2024 found. You'll notice when you write et al., there's a period after all. There is not a period after et. So if you write this as a parenthetical citation with the year right after it, you're going to have et al. Period, comma, and then the year. One other thing that you want to notice, because we're writing in APA format, is that we use past tense verbs to talk about established literature. So I have Stoner stated, Miller and Cook observed, and Kemp et al. Found. And this is because in APA, we consider works that have already been published to have been written in the past. This is in contrast to some other styles that say you talk about literature in the present tense. No, in APA, we will use past tense. If you need any more help with referencing, you can check out the APA 7 publication manual or the super awesome and very highly clickable, well-organized APA website. They have examples of just about every kind of reference that you would need to write on their website and even more in their publication manual. And of course, we always invite you to email us at the Online Writing Center at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, and one of us will answer pretty promptly. So today we reviewed together with Tanya, our football coach, key concepts and texts to understand interpretation and evaluation in rhetorical analysis. And we talked about how to workshop APCO 311 Week 3 Assignment 1, Rhetorical Interpretation and Evaluation, the big so what of rhetorical criticism. Before we wrap up, let me tell you a little bit more about the services we provide at the Online Writing Center. You can check out the Online Writing Center homepage in My ACU. There's a link right there. You can watch this video linked in the second line for the steps to make an appointment and submit a paper. We work with you at any stage of your writing, and we offer two types of appointments on our schedule. You can schedule an email or asynchronous appointment where you upload the paper and the tutor sends you feedback by email within 24 hours. That's called the Writing Center report. If you want to talk to one of us in real time, then you can make a Zoom appointment. And at the time of your appointment, you just go to the schedule, click on the Zoom link, and make sure you remember that all of our appointments are in Central Time. You can also access many writing-related resources on the Online Writing Center website. Whether you schedule an asynchronous email/asynchronous or a Zoom appointment, our submission process is the same. You schedule the appointment at WC Online, and then you upload your paper to the appointment form. You can contact us, as we already mentioned. We invite it. We love when you contact us. Email us at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. Schedule an appointment at the second link, or visit the Online Writing Center website. We have lots of resources. Tanya featured the APA course paper template link earlier. It's a great way to set up your paper since most of our programs here are writing in APA style. We have a YouTube channel where we share a lot of our webinars and some other stuff. And we have an Online Writing Center blog where our tutors share their ideas about writing and citing, and using AI is a new topic that we have some posts about. And we also have a bunch of other webinars on our website and the YouTube channel. Here we've provided links for the first installment of our rhetorical analysis series. So if you click on the link for slides and video, it'll take you to part 1. And here we have reached the end of our series of webinars on writing a rhetorical analysis. And we thank you all for learning with us today. Tanya, thank you for teaching me something as always.
Thank you, Sherlock Emirati, for doing this. You are fantastic. Blessings to you guys. You can do this. Future readers of the world, go out there and do this.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.